Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping directly into one of the most fascinating economic mysteries out there. Consider this historical paradox for a second. Why did a 16th century empire, one that literally extracted all the gold and silver in the known world, end up declaring bankruptcy multiple times within a single century, right? It's crazy. But the answer lies in the foundational economic factors that keep certain nations prosperous, not just for a few years, but indefinitely. So if you've ever wondered how wealth truly endures on a global scale beyond just a mere resource windfall, you are in exactly the right place. Let's explore the architecture of permanent prosperity.
All right, let's dive right in. We're opening up our core mystery box right from the jump. What is the actual secret that allows some countries to maintain their riches while others just inevitably fade away? Look, it's rarely about discovering vast reserves of lithium or having one highly profitable decade of tech exports. In fact, raw resources often mask underlying fragility. The true differentiator? It's a much deeper structural mechanism. Are we talking about institutional robustness, demographic dividends, a highly educated workforce operating under airtight property laws? Actually, yeah, all of the above. It's a highly precise blueprint that separates a nation that simply got lucky from one that is engineered to be truly resilient.
To really wrap our heads around this blueprint, we have to contrast nations that build an enduring economic empire over decades with those that just experience a fleeting, temporary boom. The source material highlights a classic economic paradox you're probably familiar with: Dutch disease. It's surprisingly common. A country strikes it rich with a massive new export, maybe oil or natural gas. That massive influx of foreign currency drives up the value of their own currency, which suddenly makes literally all of their other manufacturing and agricultural exports way too expensive for the rest of the world to buy. So that windfall actually hollows out the nation's foundational economy. Temporary riches are totally reliant on this kind of volatile resource spike or some fleeting market trend. Lasting wealth, however, is a completely different animal, one that actively prevents this hollowing out effect.
Section 1. The Wealth Puzzle. Uncovering the Mystery of Prosperity.
So the source material explicitly defines this architecture not as mere luck, geographical chance, or some happy accident, but as deliberate, structural, economic factors that guarantee long-term prosperity. As the researchers state, quote, "Enduring prosperity is an engineered reality, relying entirely on the bedrock of unshakable institutions," end quote. We are talking about exact, quantifiable policies here. A nation absolutely needs an ironclad guarantee of property rights so innovators actually feel safe investing their capital over a 50-year horizon. It requires frictionless trade laws that don't just flip-flop with every single election cycle and an independent central bank shielded from political interference. You wouldn't build a massive skyscraper on sand and expect it to survive a hurricane, right? Well, in the exact same way, lasting national wealth requires a deep, engineered bedrock of these economic policies to weather inevitable global storms.
Section 2. Foundations of Economic Prosperity. The Building Blocks of Wealth.
Now this operates like a precise, almost mechanical sequence. Step 1 is establishing those core economic factors, things like highly efficient global trade networks, advanced production capabilities, and, most importantly, human capital. Now step 2 is where the vast majority of nations actually get stuck. They generate that initial prosperity, they get that first taste of immense riches, and then they simply stop building. They just spend the surplus. But step 3, that is where the magic happens. Step 3 is taking that initial prosperity and actively architecting it into a permanent system. Think of nations that take their massive trade surpluses and instead of funding immediate consumption, lock those billions into highly diversified sovereign wealth funds or massive century-spanning public infrastructure projects. They actively transform a windfall into an unshakable system of lasting wealth. And honestly, this matters profoundly when you're analyzing which emerging markets today are actually worth a long-term investment.
So all of these elements must balance perfectly to maintain continuous prosperity. Core economic factors make up one vital slice of the equation, while sustained wealth planning and decadal stability make up the rest, and the tension between these three is just fascinating. Check out this surprising fact from the research. Historically, you can have a nation operating with 100% optimal economic factors, like booming exports, zero unemployment, massive foreign direct investment, but if they possess 0% decadal stability due to shifting property laws or looming geopolitical conflicts, that wealth will completely evaporate within a single generation. Poof, gone. If any one of these ingredients is missing, the entire system collapses. You simply cannot have stability without rigorous planning, and you can't plan without that core economic engine driving the capital.
Section 3. Sustaining riches for decades. The ultimate test of time. Because time ultimately is the real stress test for any economy. Look at it this way.
In Decade 1, the economic factors finally align. The policies work, the initial wealth is generated, and everyone is celebrating. Good times. But Decade 2? That is the absolute danger zone. This is the period where most nations fail entirely due to institutional complacency. The challenge suddenly shifts from just making money to surviving massive global shifts. Think of aggressive technological disruption instantly rendering a primary export obsolete, or the sudden onset of demographic aging completely shrinking the labor force. If a nation can survive this danger zone by relying on its structural foundation, it reaches Decade 3. And by Decade 3, lasting wealth is actually achieved. The initial economic factors have compounded decade after decade, locking in that wealth permanently and insulating the nation from standard, cyclical economic shocks.
The macroeconomic reality of our world is so heavily defined by the mathematical power of compounding growth versus the violent volatility of a boom and bust cycle. And as a result, a massive gap in prosperity opens up over time. You see, boom and bust nations shoot up high, sometimes experiencing double-digit GDP growth for a hot 5 years, but eventually crash violently because they lacked the structural foundation to absorb an inevitable market correction. Enduring nations, on the other hand, show steady, compounding, absolutely unstoppable growth. According to the source data, nations that successfully implemented this architecture saw their sovereign reserve assets grow by over 400% over a 30-year period. 400%! That effectively creates a massive economic moat. That staggering mathematical divergence is the exact consequence of whether correct economic architecture is aggressively applied or simply ignored.
Section 4. The Architecture of Forever, concluding the wealth puzzle.
All right, so the central thesis of our source material really comes down to a bold assertion made by the lead researchers. They state, quote, "The economic factors behind prosperity are precisely why some countries stay rich forever." Now, forever is an incredibly heavy word in economics, but when you completely remove emotion and look purely at the structural engineering, permanent prosperity actually becomes a tangible, achievable outcome. Removing emotion in an economic context means strict adherence to long-term monetary policy over short-term populist spending. It means prioritizing a balanced budget and relentless infrastructure investment, even when the electorate is clamoring for immediate, unsustainable tax cuts. It's really about designing a cold, calculated economic machine that seamlessly outlives any single generation or political administration. And this leaves us with a highly provocative question to ponder about the future of our global economy. Look closely at the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape today, especially with monumental transitions like the global shift to green energy or the artificial intelligence revolution. Ask yourself, which nations are merely riding a temporary speculative wave on these technologies, and which ones are actively building the ironclad architecture for the next century of unshakable wealth? Who is laying the institutional bedrock right now that will keep them prosperous forever? It completely changes how you view global news and market movements, doesn't it?
Well, don't let the learning stop here. If you want to keep mastering the architecture of the world around you and truly understand the invisible forces driving the global economy, hit that subscribe button right now. Join us for our next explainer, where we're going to continue breaking down highly complex systems into the clear, structured knowledge you need to stay ahead. Until next time, keep looking at the blueprint, not just the building. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.